The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat, a presentation of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. It's brought to you by Rolling Ford in Shell Rock.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by the Grundy Center Goliath, Doug Van Gelder.
I wish I could add a name like the Claw or something, some move that I had, but just didn't come across.
What was your move? How do I not know your go-to move?
My power switch was my go-to move from underneath, and a straight double was my key takedown.
Hopefully you didn't do too many switches in a match. You should only probably do one switch if you're really good.
But I had a power switch that nobody could stop. It was weird.
And your double was decent?
Yeah.
Like how, is that, you had a double and a switch? When I think of a guy, and see if you know who this is. He had a headlock and a cradle.
Sure, that's Eric.
Eric Sinclair. So there's some people, they can get by with just a couple moves. And speaking of that, Jay Roberts, who was a board member of ours, passed away.
Back then, when you're on top, you're looking for the cradle.
Jay Roberts was?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that's when I was on top.
Okay, I digressed, and I was on to something else, so you were still on another topic.
Yeah, I'm still in the time warp.
Wow, okay. But Jay Roberts, I think you know who he is.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I remember Jay.
And Scotty Too Hottie over here does, too. He was a board member. His son, Chris Roberts, was in my favorite era of wrestling with the mid-'90s. Of course, I've said before, like the Cedar Falls, Columbus,
Who did he wrestle
Waterloo.
for, Northwestern?
He went to Northwestern for a little bit, yeah. Columbus, West High. That was the era that I loved the sport and really got into it because we were around each other.
Blackhawk County was the center of the universe in wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, Dan Gable was from there, and you had the East stories, the West stories. Then Columbus came into it. National champions about every year. It was fantastic.
But
then the great coaching legacy. You know, Dan Mashik.
Yeah.
You know, there's more than one Dan, and Mashik was. It's legendary what he did down in Gilbertville.
But my era that I'm thinking about is the era that you helped me develop is the '90s, mid-'90s.
Yeah.
And so Chris Roberts was in that era.
Yep.
And so I miss those days, even though it's probably unsportsmanlike, when you had the Scarboroughs at Waterloo, Columbus, and you had the Whelans at Cedar Falls High School, and Kerry Whelan, after the match, is shoving one of the Scarboroughs because they just wanted to instigate something. And so I don't necessarily know that I want to get back to that. And those who were in that era know Kerry, and he was
Kerry
that guy.
Always had somebody to back him up. Yeah. His twin brother.
And Darryl was in that mix, and Kerry was a good wrestler. So you had three quality wrestlers.
He was more interested in stirring up trouble than he was in wrestling a lot of times.
That's why he's great at what he does now. He's a principal over at Expo.
That is good.
He knows how to sniff these guys out. He knows what to look for.
He knows troublemakers.
Yeah, he knows, and so he's really good at his job.
I'm sure he is.
He does a fantastic job. But I want to get to the point where we get at least a Michael Kelly versus Kyvan Gadsden again. That type of thing where you go and you just want to see the one match. That's all you need to get wrestling going is you need one guy to go watch. Like a Tony Davis back in Northern Iowa. We talked about that. I'd go to watch Northern Iowa wrestling for one guy, and that was Tony Davis when he was there for those 2 years. Because, he was absolutely exciting.
Well, see, that's where I came from. That's why I was a Cyclone fan, is because that's where all the wrestlers were at that time when I was about the same age you're talking about. So, when I was 16 through 25, I was really into Cyclone wrestling because they were the champs. A lot of champs.
So
then after that, Gable goes to Iowa, and the rest is kind of a long and rewarding story there. So
if we had to narrow that down on the excitement scale, who would you say? Northern Iowa, I think, has had, even though they don't have the results that Iowa State and Iowa have had, even the last, since Schwab has been there, I would have to say if I'm going for pure entertainment and excitement, I think Northern Iowa might be near the top because you had
recently.
Recently.
Oh yeah.
When you had the Laser, Joey Laser, you had the Cologne, the Peters, you had that trifecta there, and then
you won't find
that,
a better and more exciting match than against Oklahoma. What was that? 2 years or 3 years ago now already?
It might have been 4. I mean, it was a while back.
Blaze came through.
Blaze came through, and you had an exciting product. Who was the last exciting Iowa wrestler? It might have been last year, and I'm just not thinking of it. But when I say that, and I just have to shoot off the cuff, I think Brent Metcalf. That was 2010. Was there someone that has been exciting since? And McDonough did a nice job. He brought some good energy. But who's that guy that you think
that's
of?
the one guy you want to go see?
Yeah.
You're right. They're probably missing.
Kyvan had spots. I mean, there were times, and Kyvan will admit this, where he wasn't as offensive as he could have been. I mean, there were some 3-2 matches where he should have really opened it up, either gotten a major tech or pinned the guy, and he came out injured, and it wasn't. It was a lackadaisical match. But Kyvan, I'll put in that ilk, especially that senior year. And there were others. Weatherman could put on a good product. Hall did a nice job, and still will. Earl Hall for Iowa State. He was exciting to watch. He has another year. But is there a guy at Iowa that gets you out of your seat right now for the last 3 years that you can think of?
Well,
Clark can be. Corey Clark can be at
he's
133.
inconsistent.
Thomas Gilman can be if you want to get a decent product. I mean, Josh Jeva was a scrambler, and so you had some fun matches there. So there were some guys, but you need to have someone
that
that
count
pops.
on that's going to go out there and go for the pin. It just wasn't there.
Because isn't that more important? Really, is to be excited about
Have the
sport?
one big name.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worked out well for the NCAA on keying in on an important match for the finals.
Sure has.
I mean, that's been dynamic, putting that great match for the last one of the evening.
Yeah,
I mean, this year
everything.
it happened to be a heavyweight situation, but
yeah,
that was cool.
Well, 2 years ago it was Dave Taylor, and I remember the energy. That was in Des Moines, Iowa. I remember the energy that was in the arena for that. I couldn't believe it because Taylor came out and he took him down right away, and Taylor was rolling in the tournament. And in my head, I'm like, this might be it. He might get him. And I've gone back and watched that match a few times, and Kyle Dake
just wasn't going to give it up.
I know his mental fortitude is just beyond anything that I've seen recently. He is relentless, and I appreciate that about him. So that's fun to see as far as the marquee matchups, but those sell themselves. But to have a guy, and David Taylor's of that ilk, of a guy that I'm getting out of my seat to go watch him wrestle.
Look at the freestyle team that the United States has put together now. They've got several guys on there that are worth going to. I could just say I'm going to go watch, see how Snyder does. Or I'm going to go watch and see how Jaden Cox does. Or, let's see, who else we got going?
Jordan Burroughs.
Oh, really?
He's not too bad to watch.
No, he's kind of fun to watch himself. So, I mean, there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
We didn't have that for that long.
Yeah, it's a good product right now, and the women's product has female wrestlers that I want to go see.
Still disappointed in Iowa not being able to put together a women's wrestling team.
How do you get that accomplished? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Other states have done it. They've got women championships in the high school level.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that I would like to see.
We call ourselves a leader in wrestling in this state. We're not.
Yeah.
It's that simple. We're not.
We've talked about it until something gets accomplished. And we go through the right channels. There's nothing that can be done. Waldorf has it accomplished. It's the only one in the state that has it right now. I think Wartburg would be a great fit if you could ever get it up there, women's wrestling up there. But there's some opportunity there. There really is. But as we move forward into just what the college season holds, I think today's guests, we have a couple Dave Meltzer is getting our Jim Melby Award during the George Tragos Sleuthaz Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend coming up actually about a week and a day. It starts on July 21st. Dave Meltzer, known amongst professional wrestling but also mixed martial arts, so we get a chance to pick his brain about UFC 200 and some of the matches that went on there. And then Troy Steiner, who was an NCAA champion for Iowa in 1992 on some of the most memorable Iowa wrestling teams. Brands, Steiner. That was that happened for 3 consecutive years. So people,
all those guys are worth. I mean, they could draw it out on their own.
There you go. I mean, but that whole team. I mean, you had 10 guys on that Iowa team that you would want to go see, top to bottom. I mean, think about it. We're trying to scramble for one guy right now. There were 10 guys, and it's in my head: Zapital, Brands, Steiner. And then you had Tom Ryan, who's the current head wrestling coach at Ohio State. Mark Ryland, who was a little bit up and down. There were times, but he was a fun guy to watch. Bart Schelsvig, Travis Pfizer, and John Osendorp, who still remains probably the most exciting heavyweight. He and Lou Bannock are fighting it out. You know he was going to bring it. So, at minimum, you're going to get 8 quality matches that night, and likely 10. Talk about getting spoiled. I mean, you reach the apex of entertainment with those teams. And I just think once you saw that product, you just crave it. I mean, you knew with those, especially those 4, you have the identical twins back-to-back. Imagine having that and trying to coach against that.
The intensity in the practice room, oh my God.
They built each other. And they weren't the guys that were the David Taylors that, I mean, they had to get in there and they had to earn it, earn it a little bit. Well, not David Taylor did too, don't get me wrong, but there was just kind of a natural flow to David Taylor. And those guys really had that grind it out, work hard, you know, you get what you earn. Zapital the same way. And they really embodied an incredible era for Iowa wrestling. So we have Troy Steiner, who's the new head wrestling coach at Fresno State, on the program, so we get to talk to him in the final segment of the show. But as we look forward to the college season, I can't be more excited about Fresno State adding the sport. I think that's one of the most positive things we've had in the last 5 years.
What influence did Stephen Neal have on that?
I hope a lot. I think that in conversations with Dan Gable about that, I think that Stephen Neal has had a huge presence in California. I don't know if it was direct for this particular case, but I know that he's active in fighting for wrestling out in California. So I would like to think it was pretty high.
Still a hero.
Yeah, he does a lot.
Yeah,
he does a lot for the sport. And as we go into the Tragos Thez Hall of Fame weekend, I hope Scott gets over there. I know he came maybe a few years ago, but a lot of people that have a lot of connection to the sport. We had Bob Backlund on last week, who was a Division II NCAA champion for NDSU. The Iron Sheik has a great wrestling background, and one of those guys that respects the Olympic style as much as anyone, and that's his bread and butter. I think, of course, with pro wrestling, the stats get manipulated a little bit. I think some people have said he was a 68 Olympian, and he really wasn't. He was like a national team member, but he was a Greco-Roman national champion in the United States. Came in and knew one name. He knew Alan Rice. He knew that name. And he went up to Minneapolis in the Twin Cities and found Alan Rice. And Alan Rice is going to be coming down for the whole weekend. And then we have a wing named after Alan. It's the Alan and Glory Rice Greco-Roman Hall of Champions. Yep. So the godfather of Greco-Roman wrestling is going to be there, and I know that's going to be a great.
He fills that role of godfather perfectly.
He does, yeah.
He is so quiet and soft-spoken and intent, though, at the same time.
Wears the turtlenecks and walks in. Yep. He has that vibe. I'd never kind of put that together as far as the vibe, but yeah, he certainly does that. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and J.J. Dillon's coming in for that. And all these guys have an appreciation, but they also have a background in the sport. There's a great professional wrestler. His name is Magnum T.A., Terry Allen. It was incredible when you talk to him. He's like, yeah, I'm going to come up. He's in a wheelchair. He's spouting off statistics about Gable. I'm like, how do you know all this? But he just grew up on it, knew everything about him, and so he's coming less for the professional wrestling side, although that's a big part of it, and coming more because it's the Gable Museum. And these stories just pour out year after year that we get a chance to engage with these people that have that deep respect for the sport. So it's a lot of fun, Doug, to be a part of that and see who's going to show up and why they show up.
We've come full circle. We're back to that Waterloo, Iowa connection.
Yeah, it's all about this area and what it's
having the museum here makes so much sense.
Yeah, and we need to continue to perpetuate that because we're slowly building momentum with Ryan Salas, and I think we're going to be getting a new head wrestling coach at Waterloo West that's going to be good, and that's going to be a good replacement. Kevin Emily's no longer there, so we're going to get someone into there. So we have opportunities all around us to make this community great. But it goes back, Doug. We need that one or two rivalries within the community that get us excited about the sport. And you can report on it, and you can go. And if they're smart, they'll do the same thing. If West and East gets that, you put them as the last match. I don't care how you have to fudge it. You make that happen. I mean, if you have Michael Kelly and Kyvan Gadsden, you make that the last match. You don't put that anywhere other than the very last match because people want to come see that and people are going to get out of their seats. And I look at you, man. I mean, you're a huge wrestling fan. I don't see you at high school wrestling meets anymore. And that's like it's like the Bon Jovi song "Shot to the Heart" and "You're to Blame." That's you.
Yeah. I've got the goal. I'm going to make it to every state to see a wrestling meet. That's going to have to involve a lot of high schools.
You're going to go to every state?
Every state and see at least one wrestling match in every state.
Wow, this is a bomb that I wasn't ready for.
When did I told you about that.
I mean, maybe you did, but I don't know when it's going to happen. I guess sometimes I have a hard time believing you after you said you were going to wrestle Stephen Neal. Yeah. So go ahead. But anyway.
Yeah.
You said you're going to enter the UNI Open, too, so just forgive me if
this doesn't require much except my presence. So.
Right. That you need a documentary crew if you're going to go around for that.
No.
We need to have you followed and have you on film.
My wife and I'm retired now. My wife isn't. Once she retires, we're gone.
And it is an RV that you're going to get
Yep.
and do that?
Yep.
All right, be safe. Be safe.
And I expect we'll see a lot of, we're going to see a lot of freestyle matches. And
yeah.
Because it's, I'm not going to stay north. I'm going to head south in the winter, so when the wrestling is going on generally.
Go down to Texas and try to get Mississippi wrestling down there. That's the only state that doesn't have
Mississippi?
it. So, yeah. So maybe you go down there and you get a grass match out there and just watch it just for the heck of it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, we have to cut this segment off. We have up next Dave Meltzer. He is the 2016 winner of the Jim Melby Award for Journalism. He will be next on the mat. 1650 The Fan.
1650 The Fan, KCNZ.
We are back on the mat. 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We are just over a week away from the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame inductions. One of the inductees is on the line with us. He will be getting the Jim Melby Award for Journalism. Dave Meltzer continues to be one of the most successful and popular journalists in professional wrestling and in mixed martial arts. He is best known as the publisher and editor of the Wrestling Observer, a position he has held since 1983. Meltzer is also a regular contributor to the Wrestling Observer Figure 4 online audio podcast. He is on the line with us. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Great to have you on. And, one of the things you have a history with is UFC. You were part of UFC 1, covering that, and you likely watched UFC 200. I know you did.
Yeah,
but,
I was actually there, yeah.
And had the opportunity to see all of this transpire. Put it into words. Difference between UFC 1 to what we've seen today. Give us the breakdown on the evolution of the sport.
Kind of like the caveman who discovered the wheel, and
Yeah.
and a jet. I don't know. I mean, it's just incredible. It's amazing that in 23 years it's evolved as quickly as it has, especially in the last 11 or 12 years when it comes to popularity. Since really when I mean, it's an amazing success story that the Lorenzo Fertitta and his brother and Dana White bought the company for $2 million and just sold it for $4 billion. And took it from this kind of underground pay-per-view thing that had potential and was actually popular in the 90s, and made it into a semi-major sport worldwide. It's the biggest sports franchise sale in history by almost double. So the Dodgers sale in 2012 was $2 billion. So this is double the biggest sale in history. It's an amazing story, and obviously, they created the original UFC was throwing a bunch of guys in there that were very good at aspects of fighting. You might have like a jiu-jitsu guy and a karate guy and a boxer and all this that were established guys in some of those professions, to creating an actual sport of a mixed style, kind of like a decathlon of combat athletes, and making it a sport. And having that sport, you can go into any city, and there's going to be MMA training centers in those cities. I mean, it's crazy.
And as you go back, the one image I have in my head was there was a match between a boxer, and he had one glove on and missing the other. Yeah, and when you think back to that, it was, you talked caveman. It was so primitive. Why does that stuff happen? Was it just being naive about how this sport should transpire?
Well, in the beginning, nobody knew. I mean, I remember we were, before the first UFC, nobody except for some of the Brazilians who had some involvement, because there was the Vale Tudo fighting, which was similar to what UFC was, had been done in Brazil since the 20s, maybe even earlier than that. And so the Gracies and some of the Brazilians were kind of aware of what a fight would be, but Americans had no idea. I mean, they thought it would probably be like a movie fight or like a boxing match. And there was very few people really aware of submissions. I think that was some pro wrestling people probably that were hookers kind of knew about submissions, but that was like a very closed society, and very really the knowledge was very limited. So when you watched it and then you saw all these submissions, the public just was fascinated by it. And so the original UFC was successful, and it was really legislated out of popularity, in the sense that it was doing very well on pay-per-view, but then John McCain came out against it, and states banned it, but more importantly, pay-per-view cable companies started pulling out based on the bad publicity. And without the clearances on pay-per-view, they couldn't make money producing the show. So the original owners pretty much couldn't make money on the shows, and they sold it, essentially because every show was a loser. And when the Fertittas took it on, they were able to get it back on pay-per-view. But it wasn't so simple. For whatever reason, the novelty was gone, and they struggled on pay-per-view for years. Once they got on television, then it all exploded. The original Ultimate Fighter, there was a lot of luck involved in that, because the Ultimate Fighter, the original season of the Ultimate Fighter aired at 11:05 on Spike right after Monday Night Raw. This is when Raw was far more popular than it is now. So they could piggyback off that audience, and it was really the pro wrestling fan audience that was the original television audience for UFC. I mean, now they have separate audiences, but for the first couple of years, I mean, they were drawing from the pro wrestling audience, and that's what enabled them to turn their pay-per-views around and become a flourishing business.
In 2007, Frank DeFord said that Dave Meltzer is the best sports reporter in the country. We have Dave Meltzer on the line with us, and as we look at the evolution of the sport, UFC 1, which you covered, UFC 200, which you covered, give us the one guy, and I won't allow you to go beyond one guy. Who's the one MMA guy that changed the sport forever?
There isn't really a one guy, but if I'm going to give credit to one guy, it's Dana White. More than any of the fighters. Because it was the ability to promote it, and that made the whole thing flourish. And he was also the mastermind behind the key decisions that were made, the key matches that were made, things like that, key signings, getting Brock Lesnar, which was a big deal, pushing Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey. The Ronda Rousey thing was a real big deal in hindsight. And, you know, I mean, it wasn't so much signing her. That was a no-brainer. But going all out on pushing her. I mean, if you go back to 2003, there was so many people, or 2013, I should say, there were so many people who were so negative on the idea of not so much women fighting. Many were negative on women fighting, but more negative on the idea of you could never put a woman in a main event, and certainly not on pay-per-view. And this is just, people will never buy it. And then she ended up being, you know, either one of the two biggest draws the company ever had, and a mainstream. You know, she became, you know, realistically until, you know, the loss to Holly Holm and her subsequent disappearance, she was probably the most popular female athlete in the country. You know, so I mean, it was amazing. You know, just some of the different things that he did, and I've dealt with him for years. And I mean, the Rousey thing was interesting because he was so gung ho. You know, at first he was like, women will never be in UFC. And then when he flipped, and I know the night he flipped because we were texting back and forth, it was he was in Columbus, Ohio in 2012 when Ronda Rousey fought Miesha Tate for Strikeforce, and it was, we were just, you know, and I go like, you know, this is money, and he goes, oh, I know it. And I mean, he brought Ronda in, and I thought, like, you know, we'll put her on TV a few times so people see her before you put her on pay-per-view. And it's like, no, pay-per-view right away. And then they promoted it like it was a historical event. And he made it a historical event. It was a huge success on pay-per-view, and they never, you know, they've headlined many shows with women that have done absolutely incredible numbers.
Getting back to what, you know, the roots of UFC, do you think the tough man contests that were out there had any bearing on the future of that?
As a precedent, there was, you know, they were both around at the same time, and the tough man contest came a lot earlier.
Yeah.
You know, the tough man contests were people who really were not fighters being thrown in there to fight, and some of the UFC guys originally probably really weren't fighters either. But some of them were, you know, some of them were really good at their sport. I mean, if you look at the, you know, the early UFCs and some of the guys in there, I mean, they were, you know, especially with the wrestlers. I mean, you know, Dan Severn was a, you know, he was past his prime, but he was a great college and wrestler and national, you know, wrestler and everything like that. He was really one of the best wrestlers of the was it the 80s, I guess it would be. And then, you know, that led Mark Coleman was an Olympic wrestler. Randy Couture was almost an Olympic wrestler several times and a Greco-Roman national champion many times. So, you know, you really got, you know, people were going like, oh, you know, the quality of the athletes weren't that good. They you know, not all of them, but there were world-class athletes in UFC going way back. I mean, now, you know, the competition in UFC now is much, much stiffer, obviously. You know, Maury Smith was a great kickboxer. You know, I mean, if you know, there were some very strong credentialed athletes in the UFC from the beginning. Mark Schultz, you know, obviously one of the best wrestlers this country ever produced.
Yeah. We're on the line with Dave Meltzer. He will receive the 2016 Jim Melby Award from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. That will be during the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend, which will be July 21 through 23. We're on the line with Dave, and professional wrestling, mixed martial arts, you know both extremely well. And you talked about one of the heads of the organization of UFC, Dana White. The other side, WWE, that's Vince McMahon. Compare and contrast those two. Are those guys similar in how they execute?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the two. One thing, a couple of years ago, ESPN did like this feature, and it was kind of backstage at WWE, and they showed Vince at the War Room and things like that. And I remember one of the top guys at UFC came up to me, and he had his eyes all bugged out. He says, Dave, you see that thing on Vince McMahon? And I go, yeah. And he goes, that's Dana. And I go, I always told you that. You know, there's a lot of similarities between the two. I would say that Dana is a lot more of a people person, you know, of the two. At the same time, Dana will say anything with no compunction. Vince is a lot more careful with what he will say. And, I mean, in their day, you know, both were visionaries and they built companies. You know, Vince has the advantage where you could say he stood the test of time because Vince has been in charge of a company for 34 years. But in a lot of ways, I think what Dana did was more impressive, and I'll say this because in 1982, when Vince took over pro wrestling had been around in this country for 100 years and had been thriving at the time on a regional basis, not on a national basis, because that's just how wrestling was. But it was huge on television all over, I would say all over the country, but in much of the country, it was huge on television. Its cable ratings were the top, it was the top-rated show on cable already. So he took a flourishing industry and changed it. And in many ways, if you look at pro wrestling in 2016 and professional wrestling in 1982, and I was around both eras, I would say pro wrestling in 1982 was significantly more popular. Not as lucrative, but nothing is. Everything, inflation and ticket prices and everything have changed. Every sport, is more lucrative now than it was in 1982, but that doesn't mean it was more popular. I don't know that I don't think baseball is more popular, but its finances are probably, 10 times what they were in 1982 or some multiple like that. Whereas Dana took something that was literally nothing in 2001. It was nothing and built it into something that's every bit as big as pro wrestling right now. I would say that the two are comparative. Pro wrestling, I think, is more popular in some ways, but a big UFC show is bigger than a big pro wrestling show, and both are being exported worldwide. I think pro wrestling exports easily, and one of the advantages of pro wrestling, I think it has a lot more appeal to kids because it's a lot simpler. But UFC, by being a real sport, it has more significance. It gets more sports coverage, and it's the ramifications of a big match are a lot more important, and it's just it's the difference between sport and entertainment.
You're going to be in Waterloo, Iowa in just over a week. You're getting a really big award from us for journalism. That's how information gets out. It's how people get promoted. You put these guys on great in-depth articles. You do some incredible work. You're being rewarded for that with the Jim Melby Award. Your thoughts on getting this award and coming to Waterloo here in a couple weeks?
I'm really excited about coming. I've been told, I have so many friends who have been to the museum, even before it was in Waterloo, when it was originally in Newton, right?
Correct, yep.
Yeah, from Newton, I had friends who went to Newton and just go, you've got to go. And it's just one of those things where I just never went, just because of the time. So I'm excited, I'm bringing my family, as far as that goes, and I'm so excited to see the museum. That's something I've always wanted to do anyway. As far as the award, I'm thrilled at that, especially because of the Jim Melby name, because Jim Melby was, if it was not for Jim Melby, I would not be around. And that's not just hyperbole or anything. It's just like, that's 100%, there's not even a question that I would probably be, I would probably be writing baseball or football or something. I'd probably be a sports writer, but pro wrestling, not a chance. He helped publicize me. He helped, from day one. I had sent him when I was 10 years old, kind of like this mimeographed. It might not be mimeographed. It might be just this type thing, this mock newsletter thing. And I sent it to him, and he was in Wrestling Monthly magazine, which he did the fan club column, and he said, "Oh, I got this thing from." There were kids all over the country doing that in those days. It wasn't unusual. But he says, "Oh, I got this thing from Dave Meltzer, and it's one of the best new things I've seen." And people started writing, he had my address, and people started writing, "Oh, can we get it? Can we get it?" And it wasn't like it was a lot of people, but it was enough people to keep me going. And that was in 1971 by the time I was starting to get those letters.
Yeah.
And, I've followed wrestling ever since and have written about wrestling consecutively ever since.
So I got to know with these, you do these tributes to professional wrestling legends when they've passed. How long does it take you to write one of those?
It depends on the person. It's essentially about a week process.
Man.
Of just extensively researching. In case of Dusty Rhodes, it was, a lot harder. When you have someone with a career like that, a lot of people. I very much, when that happens, I try to mentally get in the time and place of that person and write about it then. Which sometimes it's not that hard because I remember that time and place because I saw the guys in their era, like Dusty, so to speak. But, if it's something like a guy from a previous era, it's tough because I wasn't alive and didn't see it, so then I have to start talking to people about it. And, I really, you research it too, but I really, luckily, with most of the guys, there's contemporaries around, and I really like talking to them. I mean, that's actually a fantastic learning experience doing those things. But I really do try to work hard on those things because, especially when it's, again, like a Vern Gagne or someone of, we've had a lot of them, Roddy Piper, Dusty. I mean, just a lot of real big stars in recent years have passed away.
Yep. All right, if it came down to it, this is your final question. Mixed martial arts or professional wrestling, which one do you like covering more?
I spend way more time on professional wrestling.
Yeah.
But it's impossible for me to. I mean, it's not mixed martial arts or pro wrestling. It's company it's whatever company is the most entertaining. I mean, I think that I probably as a fan enjoyed New Japan Pro Wrestling more than anything. But I wouldn't say. But covering New Japan Pro Wrestling, I wouldn't say that. I would say when it comes to coverage. I mean, certainly lately I would say UFC just because of all the crazy stories recently, but I think that going forward this summer I'm going to say WWE because they're the ones that are going to start making changes, but then again it may be UFC because with the new ownership it's going to change. So it's whatever's more interesting that week. I don't really have I don't have a favorite company or like one or the other. I would say that they're I mean maybe I'd say I'd lean towards pro wrestling in some ways, but like I said, when UFC is hot and interesting, I mean, I'm as interested in that as anything when that's the case.
All right, we are out of time. Dave, thanks for being on the program with us. We're excited to see you in just over a week. Congratulations on receiving the Jim Melby Award.
Thanks very much, and I really appreciate the award, and I can't wait to come, believe me.
All right, we appreciate it. There's Dave Meltzer. Great job, Dave. Up next, we have the new head wrestling coach at Fresno State. Troy Steiner is next. On the mat, 1650 The Fan.
Your home for the Dan Patrick Show, 1650 The Fan.
Hey! We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I'm Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. Our final guest was an NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Iowa in 1992. Most recently was an assistant wrestling coach at Oregon State, and now he's the new head wrestling coach at Fresno State University. Troy Steiner, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Pretty amazing journey, North Dakota to Iowa, Oregon State, now at Fresno State. You're in California. You grew up in North Dakota. Pretty amazing journey for you, isn't it?
Yeah, who would have ever thought?
Yeah.
From North Dakota, I'm going to be in California.
You like Fresno?
I know that.
Fun being out there?
Yeah, no, it's been good. It's been good. There's great support here, and that's what really drew me to this whole situation is just what I felt from the university and from the people in this valley. So I just think I got a very unique situation.
Pretty incredible journey for Fresno State Wrestling. It was a program that was pretty solid. You had some good wrestlers come through. Most notably, the Abbas brothers were through that program, and now you have an opportunity after it got dropped to resurrect that. What does that look like for you as far as just bringing it back from the dead and trying to create a new program that was once a proud program?
Well, to me, it's been a program that's been, away for 10 years. So you're really coming in here to starting everything new. And what I liked about it is what intrigued me about it was being able to put my hands on every piece of it and really coming in here and creating the culture that I want. I didn't have to come in and change a culture or do anything like that, but there's no doubt there's a lot of components and that have to be put in place, and that's my job to do that. But there's so much to do. My head's kind of spinning right now, but that's what I signed up for. So I gotta work with it and put things in place and just kind of take one day at a time and just keep marking things off the checklist.
What is the culture like in California wrestling? You have seen a lot of different cultures in your experience in the sport, but how do we describe what California is like?
Well, I think this area here. I mean, I think California in general is, they got a lot of numbers. For one, there's a huge number of athletes that wrestle, and so that's something I can really pull from. But in this Central Valley here, it really reminds me of a Midwest community. It's all agriculture. I'm not sitting by the ocean. It's very different than being in L.A. or San Francisco. I'm in the valley, a very agricultural place, very blue collar. And when I came down and visited, it really reminded me of a Midwest community because of that. And the people are very like-minded, just like they back there with being in the agriculture. They're not afraid to work, and most people have worked for what they've got, and and a lot of that goes right into wrestling. I think that's why they're strong in wrestling.
We're on the line with Troy Steiner. He's the new head wrestling coach at Fresno State in California. Tom Ryan has made the comment when he took the job at Ohio State that he wanted to box in Ohio. How do you feel about that as far as just recruiting? Is there enough talent in California just to keep you sustainable and make you successful?
Well, I think that, I'll go where I need to, but I'm going to start right here at home, and pull these kids, give these kids an opportunity. They haven't had a lot of programs here to provide or give them the resources they feel they need to be successful. And that's one thing I have to put in place as an institution or a program that has the right environment where they can succeed. And that's my job to do that. Now they're still going to have to put the work in. I can help guide them once I get this set up, but they're still going to have to put the work in. But there's no doubt that's why I went to Iowa. It had the environment around that I needed, that I felt I needed to succeed.
With a program being gone 10 years, facilities is a question that would be on my mind. Do you still have a wrestling room? Is it something that had to be rebuilt? Or are you guys going to have competition space?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. The building that the practice facility for wrestling is housed in, as well as the basketball and volleyball. It's in the north gym. It's in the older building. But the president has given the athletic department $10 million to renovate this thing. So
wow.
They're starting now. I'm actually in a temporary office in a different building right now. But when this thing is completed, I will have offices there. We'll have our locker rooms in there, and then we'll have our practice facility in there. So right now there is an old wrestling room that they had 10 years ago, but they're going to renovate everything. So it's going to be a totally different building, and it's at no expense to the athletic department. The president gave them $10 million to do this. So.
I always like connections, and Jerry Abbas was a three-time finalist, and then, of course, his brother was a three-time NCAA champion and an Olympic silver medalist. But Jerry Abbas has a little bit of a connection in that he was the 142-pound runner-up in 1993. The year you dropped down, that was your spot at 142. You dropped down to 134. Is it strange kind of having a guy that was in the program and you probably want to engage at some point to be involved in the program, knowing that there is some sort of a history there between you guys?
Yeah, that was many moons ago. I think if I was coming out of 1995, I probably wouldn't want him around, but and I would probably not talk to him much just because how I was. But I've grown as a person, and I know that I need to draw everything I can into this program and people around it that can help the student athletes come in here and succeed. So if he's a guy that I'm looking at, or if whoever it is, I'm gonna pull him in. And as a competitor, you I don't know. I never liked being around my competition too much, but he's no longer competition. He's someone maybe that I can gain something from, and our athletes, more importantly, our athletes can gain something from. And if that's something that I feel is going to benefit them, then I'm going to look at doing it.
You've been away from the Iowa program for a few years. You went to Oregon State with Jim Zaleski. When you think about Iowa wrestling and you have that the gift of hindsight, what are your thoughts on Iowa wrestling all these years later?
Well, it's still a great place, and it's still a great program, and I think it all comes back to the people involved and the people that have been involved in that program throughout the years. I mean, it's not the facilities. It's all, yeah, they're nice and all that, but it's really the people behind the doors and the people that make that place tick. That it'll always be a special place to me. There's no doubt about it. And I try to take things that I remember the things that I had there that helped me be successful, and I'm going to try to put them in place here.
How about, and you think about just the culture, I think you have a story about when in '93 you guys had lost a lot of guys from the previous season, including the Brands brothers, and you were actually crossing the street and there was a guy in a wheelchair that said you're not going to do it this year, and it kind of motivated you, I think, a little bit. When you think about that now, it's pretty neat to think that people care that much to want to see Iowa wrestling succeed, or saying you aren't going to succeed.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for guys that are all in, and they're going to do anything they can to not only help themselves succeed, but help their teammates succeed, help our athletes succeed if the coaches I'm looking at. You know, I want people that are all into this, and because I know it's not going to be easy. It's not easy no matter where you're at. There's always challenges no matter where you're at to get to the very top, and that's what we're shooting for. And so I know I have to have people that are all in, and if that goes from our staff down through all our athletes, our parents involved, our boosters, our administration, everyone has to be into this and want to make this thing go. And then it's my job is to guide it. And maybe if people are a little off course, I got to bring them back on course. But it's I'm looking for those people that are all in and want the same thing, because that's one thing when I was there, I felt that we had a group of guys at Iowa that we, for the most part, I mean, we had different personalities, but there was one common goal, and that wasn't to be in the top 10. That was we all wanted to be on top, and it's, you'd think that's an easy thing to establish and to gain and to try to acquire, but it's not that easy to do, to get everyone in the program, everyone that's involved in the program, to be all in and shooting for that same goal. It's a lot easier said than done, and so that's the constant struggle as a coach that I'm going to have to try to get all the time. And you can't take your eye off that, because when you do, you're going to be passed up by someone else.
We're on the line with Troy Steiner, 4-time All-American for the University of Iowa, won it in 1992. He's the new head wrestling coach at Fresno State. When we talk about top-end goals, you talk a lot about winning and winning championships. I'm always interested with new coaches, what's realistic? I mean, Fresno State, getting a trophy would be huge. Is that a possibility with the new program?
Yeah, why not? I mean, it's not where you're at; it's what you're doing, and the people you bring in and are associating yourself with. So it's what you do day in and day out. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. Success doesn't come that easy in this sport, and anything really that's worthwhile going after. But you know, it can be done. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt in my mind. But it's something that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot of focus and discipline. And that's I've got to be the one leading that, or one of the guys leading that, you know, and really pulling that out of the athletes that come in here.
Your identical twin brother, Terry Steiner, is the head women's national team coach, and he's talked about growing up in the environment of women's wrestling wasn't something that you supported or participated in. Your brother clearly is very impactful in that side of the sport. What are your thoughts on women's wrestling?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously it's changed a lot since Terry's taken the job. You know, when he first took the job, I wasn't sure I wanted to see it or not, you know, but I think I've grown as a person, and now I don't, you know, you don't look at those, I don't look at those athletes as any different than looking at the male side of it, you know, our guys in the sport. You know, they're people that are going after a goal, and right now they're shooting for gold medals in Rio, and I think he's got 4 girls qualified that all have the ability to get that done. So it's been a growing experience for myself for sure. I know that, and I know it has been for Terry too. And I think the more we as coaches or our wrestling community open our doors to that opportunity, it's only going to help our sport grow overall.
You going to keep? You going to utilize Jim Zaleski and Dan Gable and some of the coaches you've had in the past?
Yeah, those guys they've been very influential for me, and have been very important in my development. Those are guys that I will always reach out to. Heck, I've known them both for a very long time, and I've had an opportunity to work with Jim as a coach for 12 years. I was underneath him for another 7 as an athlete, was staying there after I graduated for a couple of years. So I've worked with Jim as an athlete or a coach for 19 years. I mean, and I've known him for 28 years. I mean, he's part of my family. So he's a guy I will go to when if I need help, if I have questions. Obviously, I got to run this program the way I feel I need to, and I have a different personality than Jim, so it's going to be run a little different. But there's obviously I got along with him, and we worked well together. And he's a guy I will always look to, and I know I can reach out to, and I hope he feels the same, that he could reach out to me and if he needs it as well. And Gable is the same way. Yeah. He's obviously helped me a ton in my career, and I will continually look for guidance with those people.
We are out of time. Troy Steiner, thanks for joining us. All the best with Fresno State. We're excited to see how that program is going to develop. For Dave Meltzer, Troy Steiner, and Doug Van Gelder, I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening to On the Mat on 1650 The Fan.
You've been listening to On the Mat, a presentation of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, and brought to you by Rolling Ford in Shell Rock on 1650 The Fan, KCNZ.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.